Mr. Conley is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Mr. Mafumi, the ranking member, for having this hearing. This is the old part of my old subcommittee, so I look forward to working with you as we progress. And thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I must say I'm impressed with the data you presented us in terms of indictments, prosecutions, convictions, and recovery. I think it is important to remember the context. Congress, in the worst pandemic in 100 years, in which people, by the way, did not allegedly die, they died. Almost 1.5 million Americans are dead. Mr. Garcia didn't mention it, but I believe his mother and stepfather succumbed to COVID when he was the mayor of Long Beach. All of us have stories of loved ones and friends and associates who died from COVID because protocols weren't in place, vaccines weren't yet ready. We didn't know how to manage this unknown thing. But also the economy was collapsing. Let's go back to April of 2020. The economy was contracting by double digits. Today, the economy is growing at almost 3%. Unemployment was hitting depression level. Today, the unemployment rate is 3.4%, and what plagues us is not enough workers. Manufacturing was contracting. Small businesses were failing about 500,000 a week, something like that. We pumped $5 trillion into the economy, and it worked. We turned around the economy. We saved small businesses. We saved state and local governments. We saved people's jobs. We kept food on the table. We kept people in their homes, free from eviction or repossession. It was a massive enterprise, and in that massive enterprise, we know there are bad actors who are going to cheat, and that's where you come in trying to help us prosecute those individuals and to recover taxpayer dollars that are at risk. Mr. Shoemaker, I remember particularly the Small Business Administration, and I focused on the other part of our subcommittee, which is the IT part. I believe the basic IT platform for small SBA is E-Trans. Is that correct?
The 7A lending program, yes, the E-Trans.
Yes. And I believe back in April of 2020, the normal annual budget of SBA is about $20 billion a year. Is that correct?
I think that's high.
That might even be high.
Yeah, yes.
And we pumped $600 billion into SBA in April of 2020.
Yes.
Over 30 times the normal budget of SBA. Is that correct?
That's correct. So SBA, its normal 7A lending portfolio was about $35 billion. So the CARES Act authorized $349 billion. And as you indicated, there was I believe Congress had a concern at that time. There were oversight resources put into place. But what was not foreseen was another $300 billion infused into the program.
Correct.
And another $150 billion to take us to $813 billion.
And the problem was that we wanted it to get to Main Street, to the mom and pop businesses, small minority-owned, women-owned, veteran-owned, that don't normally participate maybe in SBA programs. And that meant we had to find outreach to them quickly and to perhaps broaden the number of financial institutions and the kinds of financial institutions that might manage those portfolios.
That's correct. There were approximately 2,000 SBA lenders in the 7A program. That number was expanded to over 5,000 lenders to ensure that the money could, make it out into Main Street.
Right. So I think SBA is a great example. We wanted this money to go out quickly to save the economy and to save businesses and to keep people employed and the public served. And that put a huge burden on SBA. I mean, you had to kind of retrofit almost overnight. And that there were lots of hiccups along the way, but how would you grade the agency's performance overall, though, when we look back on it in an unprecedented pandemic with unprecedented amounts of money and demand for loans and loans turned into grants.
So our office, at the inception of the pandemic, our job was to let SBA know of the risk and vulnerabilities that we saw based upon our past oversight experience. And in doing so, we let the agency know that strong guidance to the lending community would be vital to ensuring these programs are issued timely, and then also to have a robust internal control environment. So what is asked of any agency for any program, and certainly, would have been an expectation of SBA at that time, would have an objective. The objective would be to provide assistance to eligible entities. And the ask from that point would be to establish an internal control environment to meet that objective. And so for an OIG's perspective, it is to have assurance that, that's what the internal control environment would be. But you're absolutely right. There were guardrails that were lowered as a result of that. The Congress, for example, the Congress did not allow SBA to utilize tax transcripts for the EIDL program. The Congress also mandated the PPP program have self-certification as part of the process. So when we talk about underwriting in the PPP program, we are not talking about underwriting that's anywhere near what a 7A underwriting would look like. So those guardrails were substantially lowered, and when you don't have assurance of an eligible entity, you at a minimum are going to lead to an improper payment, and as we see in these programs today, fraud.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Mafumi.
Gentleman yields back his time. Distinguished gentleman from Greenville, South Carolina, Mr. Tim is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had a hearing about a month ago on pandemic relief fraud. PPP came up, and I asked Horowitz, the IG of DOJ, why he doesn't just get Treasury or SBA to run a report of any business that got a PPP loan that either didn't have withholdings in 2019 or the formula was off. The formula is technically your highest month in 2019 times 2.5. Generally, that's how it was. And if that formula was substantially divergent from what it should have been, then he goes and looks into it. And I didn't realize this, but he said, that would be great. I wish I could have that, but it's illegal. They can't give me that. So this is HR 1476. And what it does is it tells Treasury to run the report. It's two separate reports. It's a list of every business that had no withholdings whatsoever in 2019 that got a PPP loan, because that's clearly fraudulent. Well, there's an exception to that. Or any business that their high month in 2019 was 4x, or the PPP loan they got was 4x their high month in 2019, which is we're giving them some breathing room. I'm not trying to get people that were close. I'm trying to get people that just stole. That seems like a pretty good plan. What are your thoughts? Do you think it's good legislation? Well, who wants to start? We'll start with Treasury. Mr. Delmar.
My office does not have oversight of the IRS, but that said, I agree with what Mr. Horowitz said about the extent of Section 6103 and the uses to which tax information can be put. But if your legislation is a specific exception to the general prohibition in 6103, I'm sure it would have a useful effect.
So, and again, we're not giving them anything other than just this report. And that report would be sufficient to go and subpoena other records to then build the case to then start arresting people. So it seems to me that this legislation, if it was signed into law, would accomplish the objective. And I guess to his credit, the president is trying to achieve the same objective. He just wants to blow $300 million to achieve it. So back and front, 2 pages. If he signs this into law, it saves $300 million. I mean, I guess we're still going to have to spend some money because we're going to have to hire some additional prosecutors because it's going to be a lot of people. But at the end of the day, we're going to recover. It's allegedly $100 billion, up to $100 billion. You've already identified $5 billion. So if there's $50 to $90 billion out there, we're going to recover some of it. It's going to cost a lot of money to pursue it, but it's going to save a lot of money. And I mean, I think everybody, all Americans can agree that if $100 billion was stolen through the PPP loan program, I mean, I think these people need to be held accountable. I know that I don't think that's a partisan issue. Let's go to Mr. Shoemaker. I mean, SBA has all of this data. Y'all had to actually, the legislation says that Treasury is going to work with IRS and SBA to deliver this report to the Attorney General. I mean, this wouldn't be hard for you to do. Your software, you could say you have access to this information, do you not?
We do have access to the PPP data. The SBA does have access to some of the tax transcripts, but the data run, the IG Horowitz is indicating that is not available to us at present.
Okay, so that would be IRS.
Yes. Yes.
So Treasury, well, the IRS and SBA are going to have to work on this together. And that's what the legislation as drafted says, because
Yes.
they're going to need your help to see the PPP amount and then the alleged justification, and then the actual tax records will show whether it was legitimate.
An indication, yes.
And again, there's always going to be exceptions, but overwhelmingly this will achieve the desired objective and save the $300 million that is being proposed to throw at it, but also likely recover quite a bit.
The thing that I believe that we need to think through, this is after the fact. This is pay and chase. Imagine if this control was on the front side.
It would have delayed the ability to get the money out, I'm sure. And at the end of the day, we were building the cars. We were driving 90 miles an hour down the road. And I will say that SBA and the government brought my faith back into humanity during COVID. People were working enormous amounts of time to get the needed relief out the door. And so I appreciate all the work that the federal government did to achieve that objective. I am over time. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman from South Carolina yields back his time. The gentlewoman from Vermont, Ms. Ballot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Turner, Mr. Delmar, and Mr. Shoemaker. I know it's been a long afternoon, so really appreciate your time. I was on the front lines dealing with the pandemic in Vermont. I was leader of the Vermont Senate, and what I remember most about that time was thousands and thousands of Vermonters calling my office, calling my colleagues with one message over and over again. We're desperate, right? We can't afford food. We can't afford our housing. And the answer for many of them was the federal assistance they received in expanded unemployment benefits and through the Paycheck Protection Program. So obviously these are huge national programs. We are all, I think, in agreement that we have to make sure we are rooting out fraudsters, that we are making sure that we are, holding scammers accountable. But I want to put a face to this program, PPP in particular. When Vermonters think about that program, they think of places like Otter Creek Child Center and College Street Children's Center. The PPP program helped these child care centers stay afloat in the early days of the pandemic, so that they could continue serving families. And people were desperate for how it was that they were going to continue to get the care that their children needed. And, according to folks who work at Otter Creek Child Center in Middlebury, PPP helped us support both families and teachers through our closure period from March 18th to May 31st. That's 2020. The funds allowed us to continue to cover payroll, keep spots available to families for when we reopened in June of 2020, and PPP provided a critical safety net and a stress relief in a very uncertain time, in a very stressful time. So the funds allowed us to successfully reopen in June of 2020, meeting all required state and federal mandates while only being at 50% of capacity because of extenuating circumstances related to the pandemic. So I can say I'm here as a member of Congress, newly elected, but I'm also here as a mom and a former teacher and member of my community, and I know how critical that program was. PPP meant that hundreds of kids could keep getting high-quality early child care at places like Otter Creek and College Street Children's Center. It also meant that their parents could stay in the workforce or get back into the workforce, something that we're all still struggling with. So as I said earlier, we need these programs to have integrity, right? We need to hold fraudsters and scammers accountable, not just to the federal government, but accountable to their communities and the resources they were taking away from organizations that desperately needed that money. So Mr. Shoemaker, can you just take me through how did fraudsters take advantage of PPP program and the expanded program we called EIDL, or the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Programs? Can you just give me some examples? And I apologize, I was needing to be in another hearing. That's how it is in Congress. You got to be in another hearing, got to run back. So if I am, asking you something you've already covered, please forgive me. But if you could highlight that, that would be helpful to me.
Sure. Within PPP, there are a number of different fraud scams. We've seen things where in Oregon, there was a dentist. There was $170 million attempted to be stolen across all the programs, RRF programs alone. In May of 2022, there was a scam called My Buddy Loans, where these individuals, they put 400 applications in for EIDL loans. Millions of dollars at loss. And so what you have is identity theft, and SBA's programs did not provide an assurance of identity. So you had those types of scams. You had romance scams where, folks, were duped.
Yeah.
You had false businesses, false documentation, where if you had an internal control to validate the information that could prevent that. So those are the types of scams that are out there. But, IGWare is sort of famous for this. Fraudsters are going to do what fraudsters do. They are going to come for the money. So you have to have the internal controls to root those guys out before they, tear down the system.
I appreciate that. So in essence, I think we all want to try to focus on solutions here, right? It's a yes and. Yes, we helped a lot of people, and we need to do it better in the future. And so I want to make sure that we are continuing to make the investments that inspector generals need in order to make sure that the money that we are setting aside is going to those individuals and those organizations that desperately need it and not going to fraudsters. So I thank you for your time. I yield back.
Joelman yields back her time. Now recognize the distinguished gentleman from Alabama, the chairman of the Policy Committee for Republicans, the gentleman, Mr. Palmer.
I thank the chairman, and I associate myself with the gentlelady's remarks, running back and forth. It's very aerobic being in Congress. I've got some serious issues with how your agencies have handled the fraud. Would you repeat, and I don't remember who the witness was that gave the number, the amount of fraud that we think cumulatively has occurred? Did I hear in the range, it could be as high as $800 billion?
I know we calculated the fraud to be $76 billion, and that's on the conservative side. That's labor.
In PPP and EIDL, currently our work has demonstrated about approximately $100 billion in potential fraud, but we have an ongoing assessment that's due out in mid to late spring to be a comprehensive look at PPP and EIDL fraud.
Have you heard that it could be as high as $800 billion?
No.
I've never heard that amount.
Never heard that amount?
I think the most I've heard was 400. And again, we don't know where that came from because we get our rate from the department, and that's what our numbers are based on.
My concern, and I was involved in trying to get to the bottom of the fraud in the state of Alabama, trying to get information, and what, in my working with some of the investigators, found it very difficult. They were being denied access to information. That included Deputy Inspector General from the Department of Labor, Alabama investigators. I'm concerned that the amount of fraud is substantially higher than what you gentlemen have acknowledged. And I just wonder how diligent Inspector General Turner, the Department of Labor, is going to be in trying to recover this. Is there any hope to recover this amount of money that has been taken fraudulently.
Well, let me just assure you, we take fraud serious. And,
I didn't ask you
we-
that. I'm asking you, are you focused on this?
Yes, we are. We are focused on it, but we also realize that once fraud leaves out the door, it is so hard to get back because there's so many factors beyond our control.
Well, as one of those factors that all of you are dealing with are, in some cases, states that are not willing to work with you. Is that a fair assessment?
I don't know if that's a fair assessment when it comes to recovery because the states, as well as other law enforcement agencies, to include PRAC and DOJ, have all been partners, and we've all been working this together.
Well, the GAO recommended that the Department of Labor collect data on the overpayments waived under the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, and it was done with regular unemployment payments, and the Department of Labor agreed to do that. But as of September of last year, only 30 states had reported some of this data. So if you can't get the states to report, I don't care how much you're personally interested in trying to recover it, you're not going to get very far, are you?
I agree totally with you. You made my case for me. We need direct access, and that's what we've said from day one, and that's what we continue to say today.
Mr. Chairman, it might be good if we start bringing in some secretaries of labor from the states to have a discussion about this. And one of the reasons I'm so concerned about it is that every dollar of this fraudulent money that we sent out is borrowed. We just heard the director of the Congressional Budget Office yesterday tell us that in 10 years, the cumulative spending on interest on the debt will reach $10.9 trillion. Part of that interest is going to be on money that was stolen through these pandemic relief programs. I think we owe it to the American people to do everything that we can within our power to recover this and hold people accountable. And part of the problem is that we didn't put guardrails on this to reduce the amount of fraud, particularly on the unemployment. We had states taking applications from foreign IP addresses. They were not requiring